Welcome to the Surrogate's Corner with James Mahan.
Welcome to the Surrogate's Corner. I'm James Mahan, and I passionately advocate for surrogates and egg donors while providing legal support at every stage of their journey. I'm thrilled today to have Gina Davis on the show to discuss the importance of embryo donation in the reproductive industry. Gina is a multi-state licensed, board-certified genetic counselor who specializes in the field of reproductive medicine. Her experience in the clinic and now working with clinics all around the country give her unique insight into the needs of the clinics, specifically around the logistics of embryo donation. Gina is a co-founder of Empower with Moxie and Journey Management Specialist who oversees all aspects of Moxie Journey Management. This is episode 17, What to Do with Leftover Embryos, Understanding the Option of Embryo Donation. Gina, thank you so much for being here today with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit about the founding of Empower with Moxie and why you chose to focus on embryo donation?
Yeah, my partners and I met each other after we had all navigated our own personal embryo donation journeys. And we found each other. We had all been working in the field in some capacity. I was a genetic counselor in reproductive medicine for years before I even became a fertility patient, then continuing on. And then I found myself with remaining embryos and had donated them already once. I had more to donate, but it was a long personal journey for me, an emotional one. And I found it was really hard to find support in the field. And I found that support in the first Jen Vesbit, one of my partners, who had been sharing her personal experience as an embryo donor and had been doing support groups for embryo donors for some time. Just out of generosity, she was doing these support groups for free and was posting all of her experiences. And she's a nationally certified counselor. And then we found Maya, who had her own embryo donation journey, but she was a mom via embryo donation after a long, tumultuous fertility journey. And she had actually had her own documentary out called One More Shot. And so I got to watch it before I even met Maya. I got to see her fertility journey, and I just thought these three, the three of us together, we really had something that we could kind of transform the landscape with. Maya is a licensed clinical social worker, and she kind of came from a child welfare foundation before moving into infertility and then having her own personal journey. It was just, we all had such different journeys, and we found that we needed emotional support to get through the next chapter. And it really wasn't our fertility journey anymore. So we found each other, and we thought we could probably transform the landscape of embryo donation together if we could find something that worked for all of us.
No, I think it's great because sperm donation has been around for a long time. Egg donation has been more popular in recent years. I feel like embryo donation is still kind of one of those new and upcoming areas that people don't often think about or don't often realize is even an option out there. And I'm just curious, from what you've seen, like, what do you feel is the biggest challenge or misconception around the embryo donation process?
Yeah, the unusual part of it is that it's pretty much always former fertility patients themselves, somebody that's been through the fertility journey, they have remaining embryos, and they're donating them altruistically to other people. I think some of the misconception, I don't know if it's within the fertility industry, I don't think people in the industry or in the field that have already been walking in those shoes really misunderstand, but the general community sometimes thinks that embryo donors are compensated. And that's not the case. And so that's one piece. I think that there's other misconceptions that it's a simple process, or it's a last resort option for family building, and that's not the case either. We have a lot of people who really think that really want to get involved with making a good decision for their families, and so it's not necessarily simple. You do need to go through a lot of logistics and preparation with best practices with ancillary professionals. So it's not for everybody, either on the donor side or on the recipient side. It's not for everyone. And yet it's a really wonderful family building choice for recipients. And it's a really awesome way sometimes for the right people to donate their embryos and feel really confident about what ends up happening with them, because so many people who go through IVF have more embryos than they can use. That if they have success, and because it's just not a simple math game. So I think I know that this is a lot of answers, but the misconceptions are generally around simplicity, like how easy it is. It's not emotionally simple usually, but it can be beautiful. And it's also like logistically, there are things we have to do. We can try to make it as simple as possible, but realistically, it's good to go through all those best practices because it makes sure that everybody's really informed moving forward for what this might look like in their futures.
No, I think that's great because I think a lot of times, even in my own head, when I thought about embryo donation specifically, it seems like this should be the easy part because everything that normally goes into creating an embryo is already done, and so it's like, well, we can just bypass the clinical stage and we go straight to the donation process. But you're right that because we already have embryos that are formed, there's a lot more that we almost need to do on the due diligence side to make sure that when those do get transferred or donated, all that stuff that normally would go into a sperm donation or egg donation process is kind of known for those future families. Is there anything that you guys do specifically to try and make that process an easier option for donors and recipients, or what is that kind of thing? What does that look like for you and when people join your program?
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately our mission is to make this process, while not fast, done right, essentially making sure that all those best practices are followed. And it's not just to make this more complicated, make this a checklist thing, make it take longer. No, it's really because these are two families, typically, sometimes more, coming together and they're creating a long-term essentially relationship. It can look very different for people. Not every single one has to be closely related or anything like that and closely connected, but what is important is the children's needs are kind of kept in the forefront. And so going through that actually ensures that everybody's thinking through those pieces, and that whatever comes at the end of the journey, if they're children born, that they have a good kind of ecosystem in which they're being raised, in terms of how people talk about the embryo donation, how people talk about family, and what their family is, how they have the right words for it. So ultimately, our job at Moxie, Moxie Matching, is really to make sure that those decisions are made with education and support on the front end, all the way through the journey. And so typically, once they get into a match, they've already had a lot of education and support, and we've identified places where they might need more support before they're ready to embark on this. Then once they get into matching, they get support so they can find the right family for them. And again, everybody has different needs and different wants, and that's totally great. Like, that's human diversity, and families function differently, all that. But then finally, when they're into a match, that they're made with thoughtfulness. So from genetics and genetic counseling, the Moxie Journey Management Protocol, I should say, includes doing genetic counseling so the children's health can be optimized in the future. It includes, and communication goes really well between the families with regard to medical information. It also includes mental health support to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that they feel comfortable. They've really explored what the future might look like. And then, of course, legal contracting, that every match has really good legal guidance and independent representation so that they can make the choices that make sense for them in their match.
No, I mean, I love that because there's so much around the idea that, like, oh, once I have the embryo, like, we're done. We can go off to the clinic and just try to get pregnant. But you guys talk about a program that really looks at we just said the whole person multiplier, but the whole family multiplier of what this means and what it might look like for them, in pregnancy with a child, what to do as that child grows up. So you're kind of, taking care of all those aspects and not just worried strictly about match and kind of move on. So that's fantastic to hear. In the last answer, you talked briefly about just the math of fertility treatments. And, can you talk a little bit about what you see in terms of industry norms with how many embryos we're producing, how many people are using, what the storage options look like after that? Because I would imagine that there's got to be some, link or partnership opportunity between you and clinics who generally have a lot of these excess and leftover embryos on storage.
Yeah, certainly. I think it depends, of course, on the different approaches at the different clinics and really the patient's prioritization, like what they want. So cycles can be managed a little differently. Sometimes you make a lot more embryos than you might have needed. Sometimes you're really more cautious about that. I think it's really hard, though, to find the optimal number because there is so much that goes into an IVF cycle, how much financially and emotionally and just everything that goes into an IVF cycle. So I would say that the vast majority of patients that have the opportunity to make more embryos do make more embryos. Oftentimes because they don't know what that journey is going to look like on the other side, how many embryos are going to take how many they're going to need. I'm one of those. To
Hmm.
be honest, I made a lot of embryos when I went through my cycle. It was before the time of egg freezing, and it was before PGT was kind of where it's at now. But
Okay.
those
Right.
things have changed it too. Is that we have some different options if people are really concerned about making more embryos than they can use, and they don't want to get into this situation where they have to consider what to do with remaining embryos. It's a really complex question, but I would say thinking about their family goals and their family values and stuff, it'll help them to decide how many to make. But it's very common to make more than you may need
Hmm.
because of the investment. So I would say the vast majority are kind of aiming for, if they can, 10 to 15 embryos, eggs in a cycle, typically for a stimulation. And then, I mean, I'm not an REI, so they probably have more to say about the specifics, but um, we often end up with more embryos. Not every egg makes it to an embryo. Not every embryo makes it all the way to blastocyst, which is like the final day when they usually transfer. Not every embryo makes it does PGT. Sometimes embryos are abnormal. There's just so many layers to it that
Hmm.
it's an impossible game, honestly.
Right.
It's like this calculus you're doing of like, how many children do I want? How many can I afford? How many can I parent? How many eggs and embryos do I need? It's just like this complicated math game that maybe people can't do. So I would say that ultimately, yes, we'd love to kind of be in that decision making infrastructure earlier on, have more mental health support earlier on so people can make these decisions. But the lack of standardization of options for what to do with remaining embryos. Not all clinics facilitate embryo donation. Not
Hmm.
all clinics facilitate all of the options for embryo disposition. There's just like a lack of standardization across the field. And a lot of people who are left in the lurch, kind of trying to make decisions, these really complex family based decisions without a lot of support. So
Yeah.
I would say that, yes, we absolutely, into the future, Moxie is hoping to partner with lots of clinics that are
Mhm.
either thinking about making embryo donation easier and then in-house. Honestly, we do that all the time. We're kind of running alongside programs to make the directed donation possible. We also can anticipate a future where we're getting more into the education space so that people can
Mhm.
make these thoughtful decisions on the front end, because the cycles are so many people are left with this, so many embryos, that people just kind of sit and try to make a decision about, but don't have a lot of guidance or help on.
Yeah, I can imagine that, knowing or having that partnership with the clinics, or at least the awareness that this option is out there, because I would imagine that a lot of those, families are going through we have more than we need, we're paying storage fees, we're not sure what to do, and that first conversation may very well happen at the clinical stage of like, what else can we do? And having those clinics know that rather than just sit and freeze the entire time, that this option's there could be fantastic for a lot of those families.
Yeah, I
Um,
think just having a basic level of education about what does it mean to, like, how many embryos do you create? What are your options going to be down the road? Most people have some decisional conflict about this in the end.
mhm.
What is an
Yep.
embryo? What do I think an embryo is? And
Right.
it's like it's not a static answer. Most people really, over time, after they've seen their children, be born, they start to like think about it differently. Like, what does it really mean for us?
Right.
And it's not for everybody to donate. I don't want to sound donation centric. Honestly,
Mhm.
we support all disposition decisions. However, when you make this choice, it's a more complicated one, and there are other people involved.
Right.
So we think it deserves some reflection and guidance and help, like to kind of manage that piece, because humans are so, we all have our things and we have to work through them. So our goal is really to allow that education, that kind of to interweave those decision making pieces, when people are storing embryos, but then later when they have them, are sitting with their trying to make decisions about them.
Do you find yourself having like an ideal embryo donor profile or type of family that you often see come into your program versus others, or how do you maybe look to increase the pool of people out there who are willing to do embryo donation or be donors in that space?
I would say there's no single ideal profile. Donors come with such varied backgrounds, and we really love that. Inclusivity is huge for us. We believe people have the right to make decisions for their embryos and to build their families with embryo donation, and that's going to come across the whole spectrum. So we have a lot of diverse donors on our platform, in our Moxie matching.
Mhm.
I would say the common thread is that donors that come to us tend to be very thoughtful
Okay.
and child focused. They tend to think about, what does this mean long term for the child? Even if they don't want to have close connection, they are aware that donating their embryos in an anonymous way through a clinic or some program, not having any kind of autonomy in that choice or not having any connection, doesn't usually feel right, because they really are thinking about, what does this mean for their children and what does it mean for the donor conceived child down the road. So it's a very different dynamic and environment than egg and sperm donors, because
Sure.
they are parents already, typically.
Exactly.
Not all. Sometimes people have kind of gotten to the end of their IVF journey and said, you know what, I'm not doing it anymore. And so they might have embryos at the end of an unsuccessful IVF journey, but most of them are parents. And I think that's what drives a lot of it.
Yeah. And I can imagine that the cases that I have seen or that I've worked on, it always seems like the people who are donating, like I said, you look at the math game of the embryos and you're just trying to think, like, what's the possibility that we might have a child or have a kid? Once you have that child, though, and then you think of those embryos as the beginning germination of like those living people that you now have, you start to look at that process a little bit differently in terms of what that possibility looks like and what that could mean for another family to have as a blessing or just a benefit for them as well. When your program, so I mean, imagine there's not like a typical donor profile. There's probably not an ideal or a typical recipient profile in terms of just people who are looking to have families and maybe are doing it for either financial reasons or want to have other aspects in terms of just more clarity about what the embryo looks like. Is there a certain thing that you find recipients are mostly looking for, or like a common thread in terms of those the recipients that come into your program?
Yes, but let me take it back just a second to say that I think, we don't have a common recipient profile similar to the donor side. We have a very inclusive platform, and so a very diverse population of people that are looking from all kind of walks of life and things. But again, they tend to be drawn to openness, connection, shared sense of story. A lot of them actually really like the fact that many of these embryos are coming from intimate sperm and egg sources. Essentially, that there's only so many genetic full genetic or half genetic siblings out there. Sometimes that's a draw, is that they want to work with donor egg or donor sperm. They might need both, but they really are drawn to the fact that they can know them, as opposed to getting an egg and sperm donor and doing during a more double donor situation.
Sure.
So I think a lot of people that are drawn to embryo donation are drawn to having a more limited number of people that they're in connection with. But usually that's not always the case. We have plenty of donors that have also worked with egg or sperm donors in their original cycle and have the legal authority to redonate remaining embryos. So I feel like there's a lot of people that are drawn to like different things about our platform, but the transparency, I think, is what draws almost all of them, is that we're everybody's very open, and we want to, or to the extent that they want to be, and we really help facilitate those connections and in a way that makes everybody feel comfortable, that they're comfortable with.
Right. And that openness and that transparency, and like you mentioned, the inclusivity that you have on the platform makes it where the potential pool of recipients like can find their way there, right? They're not kind of pigeonholed into this is your only option. There's lots of other things they can look at and potentially find the right match for them on your guys' platform or with your program. What do you see as like in terms of just the connection itself? Obviously, the ability to have a child, but are there certain benefits or certain items, things related to this process that your program kind of offers as like benefits to using this type of an embryo donation program as opposed to, I don't know, any other kind of typical or a bank or something else that's out there? What do you see as kind of the takeaways that your matches sort of result in, like the either aha moments or this was the great thing that we liked about going through Empower with Moxie?
Yeah, I think they feel just informed and empowered every step of the way. Like, I honestly, that's what we hear most often, is our testimonials are like, wow, everything was, it was, they felt like they were part of our community. They felt that we were, that it was, a supported, guided journey, as opposed to what they might have felt just kind of selecting egg or sperm donors in an agency or a bank. I think they feel a very different sense from from the way that we structure things. And they receive education that centers long-term child-focused journeys that really are about, like, how do we make sense of this in a way that's really child-focused. And they get holistic support. So they get, medical, genetic, legal, emotional support through the process, so that this is not just a decision where they felt that they rushed it, that they found, they went into the quickest match they could. No, it's really something that was guided by, what are they looking for? What would make sense for their family?
Okay. That's awesome. As we come to our close here, Gina, are there any last thoughts you want to share with the audience about either Empower with Moxie? And I know the mission is dedicated to increasing awareness, empowering choice, and fostering understanding for everyone involved in embryo donation. But any last thoughts that you want to share from your seat and kind of what you see and maybe hopes for the industry or embryo donation as an option for people?
Yeah, I think embryo donation is it's not just what to do with remaining embryos, it's about expanding possibility. Like, I think with the right guidance, it becomes a thoughtful, empowering act that can transform multiple families for the better. I think both sides, recipients and donors, can really benefit through this journey if they're opening their mind to it and they get the right support and they have really thought through what this will mean for them.
Oh, that's great. I love that. I mean, the idea of like that reciprocal benefit of it's not just I'm donating to somebody else and then, I'm kind of out of the picture, but it really is sort of that lifelong journey potentially of these matches kind of and what they sort of result in for both families that are kind of involved in that.
Yeah,
Gina, thank you so much.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I would just say it's like the final chapter of the fertility journey in some way. And yeah, I think it's just I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Gina, for joining us today. Thank you for listening to everyone to the Circuits Corner. If you have more questions or you'd like more information about Empower with Moxie, feel free to reach out to Gina. You can reach them at empowerwithmoxie.com. Please also remember to visit thecircuitscorner.com, like, subscribe, and share this episode with anyone that you know of that might be interested or looking into embryo donation. Thanks so much. Have a good one.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.